Making beats doesn't have to be complicated. In this video, I made a crazy hard beat out of just 2 chords, making it one of the most simple and easiest compositions you can even make. What's going on, everybody? My name is CJ, aka CJ. I'm a music producer, engineer, gigging musician, and content creator. It's hard for me to believe, but I'm coming up on 5 years of making beats. This video is a bit of a voiceover slash walkthrough over a beat I made the other night, and I wanted to turn it into a tutorial and kind of explain my process as I go about it. If you want to get better at making beats or mixing and want to learn with me one-on-one, please be sure to stick to the end of this video where I talk about how you can do just that. So starting off here, I played around and found a tempo I wanted to start with. Now, as you can see, I have this clap and these instruments saved in my project template. I like having the clap in here just so I automatically from the start have a feel for the tempo and how the beat's gonna sound. If you want to know how to make a template like this, click the card above or the link down in the description. Next up, I go ahead and open up Expand 2. I have Expand and Addictive Keys saved to my template as well, just to save a little bit of time when I'm making a beat. So pretty much anytime I cook up with my own melody from scratch, I just play around with my MIDI keyboard, usually alternating between a major and minor chord while I scroll through some presets just to see if anything jumps out to me. In very simple terms here, not to go too crazy with the music theory, a major chord is going to be a chord with 3 notes. You're going to have the root, the third, and the fifth. Now the third is the middle note you see here, and in a major chord, it is going to be up 4 notes from the root. Now in a minor chord, it is only up by 3. The last note, which is 7 notes above the original root note, will always be there, major or minor. Most dark beats and dark sounding music is usually in a minor key anyways, and that's what the case was for this beat. Anyways, I found this preset in Expand and I played this F minor chord and I really liked how it sounded, so I went ahead and drew it in here in the piano roll. Also, make sure to save your projects often. Next up, I went ahead and played around with the root note of this chord, taking it down from an F to a C sharp, which came out to be a bit of a C sharp major 7 chord here, if I'm correct, without the F note. So I went ahead and ran it through the strum and randomizer tools as well in the piano roll just to kind of humanize it a little bit. Next up, I wanted to move on to another sound. I opened up the stock plugin in FL Studio called Flex. I like this synth sound I started with, but I wanted to go ahead and explore and see what was out there. I ended up settling on this cool piano I found in the free Synth Gemini Magnificence pack. And I really didn't have much theory behind the melody I played for the piano either. It's important to note while I'm looking for a good sound, I'm usually playing a melody or just some notes on my MIDI keyboard, so I kind of already had this melody and rhythm figured out. So I went ahead and recorded it in and hit Shift D to make all the notes the same size, and then Control Q to quantize them. After that, I opened up my longtime friend and the first plugin I ever bought, named Synthmaster Player. It has this really cool effects preset I found called Akai Sweep. I found it one day and thought I'd go ahead and use it again. It's really cool to use sparingly in beats as kind of like a wave of a pad that just comes across the sound and then backs off. It has a really long attack time, and you can't really tweak a lot of the parameters in Synthmaster Player, so I went ahead and played a MIDI note out and had it stop where I wanted it to stop, and consolidated this audio with Alt and C in the playlist, and manually faded it in to control the attack time. After I got all that sorted out, I went ahead and went back to Synthmaster Player, and I found this cool xylophone sound. I was just playing around with some different progressions and I eventually came up with this. I also quantized this as well, and I held down the Alt key and click and drug my mouse across the velocity at the bottom here to make them all at 100 velocity. I also pitched it up and down just playing around with it, and I was going to try to pitch this up an octave for the second half of the hook, but I ended up forgetting about that. At this point, I knew the melody didn't need a whole lot more to be finished, so I went ahead and created a synth bass. So I just followed the root notes of the chords of the first synth in this progression and added in an extra transition note so it gives it a little bit more depth and progression as the melody goes. I recorded it on an octave higher just so you could hear it a little bit better, but pitched it down and played around with it afterwards. Also let the notes overlap with this preset so they would kind of glide into each other. After that, I decided to go ahead and whip up the 808 pattern for this beat. I settled on this bouncy rhythm I like to use from time to time. I finally added one more instance of SynthMaster Player to find something to use for a lead, and I found this Square Wave preset that I like. Now for the fun part, the drums. So I went ahead and threw a hi-hat in here and right click and chose to two-step it out so I wouldn't have to click that in. I went ahead and drug a note out and used Alt U to open up the MIDI note chopper in the piano roll and played around with doing some hi-hat rolls. Next up, I went ahead and threw a kick in. I usually don't like my kicks to hit on every single 808 note. Every beat's different, but I feel like a lot of the times it can tend to overdo things with it. So in most cases, my theory behind my kick placement is I really wanted to kind of accentuate the 808 hits while also kind of having their own rhythm of their own. I'm not going to go too in depth for the rest of these drums. I personally just kind of have developed the sound and style I like for them, and I just usually click sounds in and know right where they need to go and that sort of thing. It's something that's definitely took, you know, time over the years to figure out. So this one was kind of funny. I was clicking through some of my favorited sounds and I found this Mario sound from the Super Mario 64 sound pack I got a while back. I liked it and wanted to use it kind of like a crash cymbal sound at the start of every 8 bars to kind of let you know that you're coming into a new section. As the end of the 8-bar pattern kind of concludes, I like to let my drums somewhat signify that. So that's why I have the open hat here hit twice and have some sort of accent sound at the end here, like this snare. So after I've got all this thrown together, it's time to arrange the beat. I usually kind of have a general idea in mind how I want to arrange things. It usually always depends on tempo and kind of the progression of the melody. So for this one, I wanted to do a 16-bar intro before the hook. It's a little bit long, but you know, people can come in early on it or whatnot, and it furthers along this progression specifically. One thing I like to do when I use a synth bass is to bring it back in for the last half of the hook, but I go ahead and cut all the bass out of it so it doesn't clash with the 808 and cause issues. It leaves you the mid and high frequencies there of the synth bass to kind of wrap around while the 808 occupies all of the bass. From here on out, I just go ahead and arrange out the verse being 16 bars, a little like bridge slash pre-chorus or pre-hook or turnaround, whatever you want to call it, as another 8 bars, and then we go right back into the 16-bar hook, and then we go back into the verse, pre-chorus, same thing. And at the very end of my beats, I usually like to double up on the hook at the very end. As far as my drums go for the verse, the first half of the verse, I have very minimal drums on here, no accent sounds or anything like that. Then for the second half of the verse, I usually bring in all my drums, you know, maybe the 808 if I didn't have it in the first half. It always just depends on how I'm feeling with it. And then for the pre-chorus, I'll go ahead and drop some sounds back out, you know, maybe drop out the kick and that sort of thing, just to give a little bit more progression to it and let the artist slash the listener know that something's about to change here. When it comes to melody for these sections, I'll usually have very bare melody for the first of the verse, and then I'll add in a few sounds back for the second half of the verse, and I usually won't have any sort of lead sounds in the verse or the pre-hook. For the hook in this case, I got rid of the 808 and brought the synth bass back in, so that way you just get a little bit more depth and progression to the beat, kind of like the intro we had. Now, I really like using risers and transition effects in my beats, and for this particular beat, I could hear using a reversed bell work really well. I placed it down before the beginning of each hook and at the very end of the hook as well. Now I did have the reversed bell pitched up to one note when it goes into the hook and a different note when it's leaving the hook. I feel like it just adds some depth and progression there. So once I go ahead and get the arrangement all figured out, I'll go ahead and rename all my mixer tracks just so I won't have to rename all of the multi-track files after the fact when I go to export everything out for the beat upload. Now, as far as mixing goes, I really just kind of level my beats and EQ stuff out, you know, a little bit more creative effects. I don't do too much overboard processing with it unless there's a desired sound or outcome I want to go for. I'll mainly just level my sounds out and get everything sounding good, and then if something needs, you know, some additional compression or clipping, I will do that. It always depends on what your source material is. You know, if there's a very inconsistent sound, I might compress that to get it a little bit more up front. Or if you're using some more quiet drum sounds, you can clip those or compress them to get them sounding a little bit harder. It just depends on how they were sound designed in the first place. So if I had to kind of summarize very quickly my personal mix theory, it would be this. I like to keep my kick drum sound as the loudest / hardest hitting element in the beat or song I'm working on. It's usually the highest on the metering unless it's been very distorted or shaped to be very loud at a lower level. After my kick, usually the second hottest item is either going to be the 808 or clap depending on the beat. In this example, I sound designed this 808 to be very hot and I have it quite a bit lower than the kick and have the clap hitting above it. For the rest of the beat mixing, it just depends on how I'm feeling and the general sound I want to get out of things. I used to use my hi-hats very low, but now I try to get them up there quite a bit. Like my accent percussion and other drum sounds are usually going to be just a little bit below the clap. I don't want them overpowering the main clap by any means. And as for the open hi-hats, I usually keep them quite a bit lower than the main hi-hat, and if I use multiple, I'll pan one to the left and one to the right. I usually try to keep the sum of all of my melody sounds a few decibels lower than the 808. Of course, this always just depends on the beat. I used to be really bad for having the melody too low, and now I like to keep it very hot so that if someone mixes vocals and a beat, the vocals don't overpower the melody too much. As far as mastering my beats go, I don't do much more than just driving all of my sounds into Fruity Soft Clip. I usually leave it at the default -4.4 dB threshold. I always turn the Fruity Soft Clip output down to -6 decibels, so that way whenever I export the WAV files, everything will be down by -6. After that, I'll throw ozone elements on everything just for the auto EQ function and the stereo imager. Now, I do not like the limiters on the elements version at all. I don't use these when I mix songs for people or, you know, beats for streaming. I'll use a different limiter, but for my beats, the only purpose of the limiter is just to get it loud. For the tagged beat, I'll have that people can stream or download for free. After I export the tagged MP3, I go ahead and mute all instances of my tag after the first one and pull the ozone back before the soft clip and turn the limiter off, just so that way we have all the EQ stuff and the imager going into the soft clip to keep us right at -6 dB. And that is pretty much my entire process for making a beat from scratch. This beat in total from start to finish took about 45 minutes to make. It always just depends on, you know, the melody and what I'm going for and that sort of thing. I've made beats way quicker. I've made beats that have took way longer. I have certainly made some very quick beats. Overall, it just takes time and practice to get good at making good beats consistently. If y'all want to hear how bad some of my earlier beats were, you can find a link to it here or in the description below. So if you all are interested in learning with me one-on-one, I've started doing some online teaching calls for beat making and mixing and mastering. If you are interested, be sure to check out the mailing list link down below and I will get back to you ASAP on there. My name is CJ, aka CJink. Thank you all for watching. Have a good whatever time of day you're watching this, and God bless.